Hi, my name is Jade, and the truth is I have no idea how I ended up here telling you this, but it all started on March 25th, just 4 days before my boyfriend's birthday. Although our relationship was a bit complicated, I wanted to find him a gift that would really surprise him. I wanted his birthday to be special. The idea was that this detail could help us make things better, since lately we were not having our best time as a couple, so it had to be something great. And after a wild search online, I finally found the perfect gift for him. My boyfriend is a big fan of superheroes and loved to collect these action figures, but there was one that I had been looking for a long time and had not been able to get it. It was a special edition of Spider-Man. That person was a childhood friend of mine who collects Marvel figurines and was selling some that he had in repeat, and this was one of them. Later that afternoon, I arrived at his house. He showed me the figure, and it was great. I knew Tom was going to love it. I spent some time relaxing with my friend, chatting and drinking coffee, and after a few hours, I returned home with the figure. Tom's birthday was 3 days away, and in that time, we saw little of each other. But I had no idea what I had been planning for him. To my surprise, when his birthday arrived, he picked me up in his car to take me to lunch with his family, which made me a little nervous because I had never met them before. And although I was very excited that he wanted to take that step, the truth is that I was a little uneasy. I remember Tom was smiling in a weird way that day. For some reason, his smile looked almost suspicious to me, but I could also tell he was a little tense. I guess that maybe I wasn't the only one nervous about the evening, but I asked him what was wrong anyway. He confirmed my suspicions and mentioned that he was nervous about seeing his family and finally introducing me as his girlfriend, and I naively believed it. However, from the very moment I got in the car, I noticed he was saying nothing, and his mind seemed to be elsewhere. So I blurted out a funny question. "What's on your mind, honey? Clearly something is going on here." But he answered me to be patient in a tone that I didn't know how to interpret it, but that only made me think that something strange was really going to happen. At that point, I leaned back in the seat, feeling a little nervous. Something he must have noticed, because then he said, "Just wait, I have a surprise for you." "Surprise? It's your birthday, not mine," I replied, and that shut him up. The conversation left me a little uncomfortable, but I decided to let the bad vibe pass. After all, I thought it couldn't be that bad of a thing until the car started speeding up a little too fast. I figured his parents lived at that address, so it didn't occur to me that something might be wrong. But when we got on the freeway, Tom started accelerating uncontrollably. At that point, I became concerned and told him so, but he just ignored my warnings, until after what felt like an eternity, he finally started talking to me. "Hey, seriously, what's wrong with you? You're going too fast and we might crash," I said. But his response froze me in my tracks. "I know you slept with a guy recently." I went blank for a moment, unable to process what he had just told me, until I finally reacted. "What the hell are you talking about?" I retorted, feeling angry at his absurd accusation. At that moment, Tom's expression had completely changed. He now had his eyes fixed on the road, his eyes wild and very red, as if they were going to spew fire at some point, and his knuckles were squeezing the steering wheel so hard they were white. "Admit it at once," he told me angrily. And that's when everything got complicated. "Are you following me?" I indignantly demanded. "Yes, I've been after you all this time." "So what? If I have suspicions, of course I'm going to check, and I'm not sorry because what I saw confirmed that I was right." I couldn't believe it. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I blurted out. "I was just a friend and I was shopping for your birthday present." At that moment, Tom turned to look at me and his eyes were injected with a fury I'd never seen in him before. And in a fit of rage, he grabbed my neck so hard I thought he was going to strangle me. "Don't use my birthday as an excuse to justify your crap, you're shameless." I was completely flabbergasted by this side of Tom. He had never behaved so violently before, but I tried to remain calm. "I'm telling you the truth." I coughed back at how tightly he was holding my neck, even though his words turned my stomach. At that point, he let go of me, but not because he believed me. On the contrary, he seemed to be completely convinced that I had been unfaithful to him with my friend. But then he began to laugh like a madman as he turned his eyes to the front and pressed harder on the steering wheel. "I'm becoming more and more convinced that it's best to get this over with," he laughed again, but in a way that sounded bitter. "What are you talking about? What do you want to tell me?" I asked, feeling worried about what might be hiding behind those words. Tom seemed out of it, and I was really getting scared of his attitude. He didn't even answer me. Instead, he did something I would never have anticipated. and it terrified me. He reached into his door pocket and pulled out a large knife that looked very sharp. For an instant, I thought he was going to stab me with it, but instead, in one swift movement, he cut my seatbelt. I froze completely, speechless. Then I watched as Tom made a sharp turn and started driving in the oncoming lane, dodging cars at full speed. Luckily, there wasn't much traffic, but that was going to end in disaster soon. I started screaming like crazy, completely desperate and panicked. "Have you gone crazy? Stop the car now! What the hell is wrong with you?" I screamed out in fear. But Tom just kept going with a look that chilled my blood. "You think you're so smart? You think you can see my stupid face without anything happening? Oh, you're so wrong, dear," he said. "You're a psycho. This won't end well for either of us," I replied, feeling a shiver run through me. "Don't worry. The Bible says that God is just, doesn't it? Well, if that's true, you have nothing to worry about. If you're innocent, you'll survive," he blurted out, laughing mockingly and turning the steering wheel erratically. "Why are you doing this? I was never with anyone else. I just wanted your day to be great." "Stop lying, that's enough," he yelled at me like a psycho. "You're all backstabbers, all of you. You brought this on yourself. You cheated on me with your friend, admit it." "No, I didn't, I screamed at him, crying, overwhelmed between helplessness and panic. Suddenly, Tom sank his foot on the gas pedal and rammed my side into another car. The rearview mirror flew off and a broken glass embedded itself in my arm, making me scream in pain. Due to the impact, he lost control of the car a bit, but quickly regained it. "It hurts, doesn't it? This is what love is like. This is the price of betrayal," he said, laughing with clear malice. "I've been following you since day one, and I always knew you were up to something weird, but you know what? You're mine now, and when a toy breaks, you throw it away." After saying this, Tom shot off towards an oncoming truck, and terror swept over me from head to toe. I had to act fast, or I was clearly going to get the worst of it. So without thinking, I gripped the steering wheel tightly and swerved the car, narrowly avoiding colliding with the truck. But in the process, we crashed into a fence, fell down a small ravine, and landed in the river. Water started pouring in through the shattered windows of the car, and when I looked over at Tom, I noticed that he seemed to have fainted, so I took the opportunity to climb out the broken window and swim away. But just as I was about to do so, I felt something grab my ankle, preventing me from getting out of the car. It was Tom. He had grabbed my foot with a force that made me shiver. His gaze burned with an intense fury, and at that moment it was clear to me that this guy wasn't interested in saving himself. He simply wanted to finish me off. The water began to sink the car, and the lack of air became increasingly alarming. To make matters worse, part of my body was still stuck in that car through the broken window, and every time I moved, I felt the shards of glass become more embedded in my skin. It was as if a rain of sharp shards were trying to bury themselves in my body. I was desperate to get out of there, so I decided I had to defend myself however I could. With the best kick I could muster, I managed to hit Tom in the face, and on the third kick I threw, he finally let go. That was my chance. I dove into the water, swimming as fast as I could, and as I did, I watched as Tom stretched out his arms, trying to catch me again with a mixture of desperation and rage, as the car sank inexorably into the river. The irony was that Tom never managed to escape from the car on his own, because the seatbelt caught him. But of course, that was only part of the story. I managed to swim to shore and get to safety. By that time, several cars had already stopped, and people helped me and called 911. After a couple of moments that seemed like forever, the police arrived and managed to pull Tom out just a second before the car was completely submerged. He got out in desperation, breathing heavily and looking around. Strangely, when he reached the shore, the first thing he did was to try to escape from the police, but they stopped him. I told the hotels everything that happened, and Tom was arrested immediately. But the craziest thing about it was that no one questioned my version at all. But then, I understood why. When they told a chilling truth, Tom was not really Tom. His name was Frederick, and he turned out to be a wanted criminal for having murdered his whole family. That was the reason I had been living so far away from them. From that day on, my perspective on people changed drastically. Although I always try to remind myself that many are good at heart, I can't help but feel distressed every time someone approaches me. Tom's image is projected in their eyes all the time, and even knowing that not everyone has bad intentions, I can't help but think that they might be hiding a serial killer inside. Since that experience, I constantly struggle to find a path to healing and resilience so I can move on with my life. But it's complicated. The experience has left deep scars on me that sometimes seem impossible to heal. This happened last month. I'm a 29-year-old guy living in Georgia, and like many, I decided to earn extra as an Uber driver. I have a day job at a mechanic shop, so my plan is to Uber at night, which is when there is less traffic and, honestly, more peace and quiet. That night I was finishing a trip near a mall around 9:30, on one of those long summer nights when the heat just doesn't seem to want to leave. I decided to take one last trip before heading home and enjoying my weekend in peace with my family. I was waiting near the mall for another trip request, but 10-15 minutes went by and nothing, so I started to get a little frustrated with the situation. I finally decided it was time to go home and resign myself to the fact that I would not make my usual quota that night. I lived in a quaint cottage on the outskirts of town, so I hit the road and started my commute. I put on some music to cheer me up and opened the window to enjoy the cool evening breeze, which gave me a rather gratifying relief. So to try to calm my mood a little more, I lit a cigarette and kept driving. I was in a bit of a bad mood because I just wanted to get there and sleep until noon the next day. Everything was going well until I approached the highway tunnel. That highway has a huge tunnel that connects the city to the surrounding areas, and since the road was clear, I thought I could speed up a bit. I was about 10 or 15 meters away from entering the tunnel when all of a sudden a guy came running out of the bushes to my right and rushed at my car. At that moment, I slammed on the brakes so hard that the tires screeched and I panicked, thinking I might have hurt that guy. My eyes searched everywhere for that man, but in the blink of an eye, he simply disappeared. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped in fright, but finally looked out the window, and when I did, I found a guy in his 30s, collapsed and panting, as if he had been running a marathon. His voice was shaking as he said, "Please help me, please." At that instant, my instinct told me something wasn't right. But I couldn't just speed up and leave him there. I'm not that kind of person, so I asked him what was wrong, why he was so scared. The man looked around as if someone was chasing him, and then, almost in a whisper, he said, "They're looking for me. Please, I need you to help me." At that point, I was seized with curiosity, so I got out of the car and started looking around. Honestly, there was no one in sight. The highway was completely deserted and only the chirping of crickets filled the air. I looked back into the tunnel, trying to see if anyone was there. What's going on here, I wondered to myself. The tunnel was very long and dark, but all I could see were yellow lights flickering on the walls. I turned to the guy and asked him curiously, "Who's looking for you?" His voice dropped so low it sounded like a shadowy whisper. Then he answered, "The shadow. The shadow people want me dead," he said. At that moment, my first thought was that this guy was completely insane, and my patience was wearing thin. "Is this a sick joke or what? Because I'm not playing games today, believe me," I replied. Suddenly, the man got into my car, sat behind the driver's seat, and said, "Just drive, we need to get out of here now. They're coming." Not knowing why, I decided to listen to him, got in the car and said, "Wait, let me call 911. My house is on the other side of the tunnel, so we should just wait for them to arrive." But in response, the guy pulled a knife out of his pocket and held it an inch from my throat. "Just drive, damn it. I'm not going to die at the hands of those crazy people because of you," he shouted. I didn't know what to do at that point. If it had been in a fair fight, I probably would have beat him up. But with a knife at my throat, I was in a bind. So I tried to stay calm and told him in a low but firm tone, "Listen, let's calm down. I'll take you somewhere safe, just put the knife down." But that didn't work. The guy started yelling again, "You don't look like you're afraid of death. I'm warning you that if you don't start right now, I'll slit your throat, throw you on the road, and take your car. I'm not going to die because of you. I'm warning you. I'm giving you a chance because it costs me nothing to do what I tell you, so cooperate or face the consequences." Before he could speak any further, he looked in the rearview mirror and noticed something in the back of the car, and froze like a statue. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, confused. "Hey, there's no such thing as shadow people. You're just having a paranoia attack. Stop this craziness and let me call 911, I said, trying to talk some sense into him. That's when he muttered, "My God, they're watching us." I turned around to see if anyone was there, even though I knew it was just his crazy talking, but what I saw froze me in my tracks. There they were, a group of dark figures standing in the middle of the road. I couldn't make out any features, just the sheer blackness they seemed to radiate. Who are they? Where did they come from? I thought, feeling my stomach sink. "Now do you believe me, drive?" the man shouted at me in his panicked voice. "What the hell are those things? Why do they look like that?" I asked, really scared. "They're all dead and they're coming for my soul," he said as the group began to approach our car. I can't describe the terror I felt. It was as if those 10 or 15 people were floating instead of walking, as they didn't make the slightest noise when they moved. At that moment, I tried to start the engine quickly, but the car would not start no matter how hard I tried. I froze in surprise while the guy kept shouting, "They're coming, do something." So I turned the key one more time, until finally the engine gave a breath and roared to life. Without a second thought, I stepped on the accelerator and thank God the car hurtled forward, leaving behind that terrifying darkness that seemed to swallow everything. We accelerated at full speed through the tunnel, and at one point I glanced in the rearview mirror. To my relief, there was no one behind us, but I was still determined to get home and call the police to report this madman who had climbed into my car. But then, just as I was about to exit the tunnel, a group of dark shadows appeared and blocked the exit. Then I slammed on the brakes and stopped in front of them with the engine running. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They had no faces, no color. They were just dark figures standing there, waiting. The guy behind me, who looked like he was on the verge of a breakdown, started screaming, "Why don't you leave me alone? Go away!" Then he started sobbing like a little kid, and at that point, the pressure in the air became almost unbearable. And what happened next still makes my hair stand on end. Suddenly, all those shadows opened their eyes at the same time. They were no longer just floating figures. Now they were shadows with huge white eyes, as if they were possessed. They had no pupils, only sclerae of a white, almost glowing color. I had never seen anything so terrifying in my life, and everyone was looking at the guy behind me, which made me feel like we were being stalked by a pack of wolves. I was in complete shock. But at one point I regained my composure, realizing the situation I was in and feeling threatened myself. So I pressed the accelerator again. The car hurtled towards the group of shadows, and to my surprise, we drove through them, as if the air opened up before us. I was completely bewildered and very overwhelmed by what I was experiencing. It was simply surreal. As we exited the tunnel, I finally saw red and blue lights flashing in the background. It was 3 or 4 police cars rapidly approaching. At that point, I didn't think to call 911. I was completely beside myself, shocked and exhausted, while the guy in the back seat kept sobbing, mumbling phrases like, "Let me go, please leave me alone." I know what I experienced that night may sound like total madness to some, and it really is. I didn't believe it myself. I was searching all the time for explanations for what I was experiencing, but I couldn't find any. However, if you believe me, there was an explanation behind it all, an extremely chilling one, and I was about to find out. The police came to us, stopped my car, and arrested the man. After I told them the story of how this man approached me and threatened me to take him in my car, the officers revealed to me that this guy was wanted for being the material author of a multiple murder he had committed just a couple of days before. This statement alone left me completely frozen. It turns out that this man, whose name was Harold Spellman, on Sunday morning entered the cathedral with 2 of his accomplices. In the middle of the ceremony, his accomplices locked the doors and began shooting at the attendees, killing 7 men and 6 women, and wounding a dozen more. They stole everything they could and fled. I can't even imagine how brutal that scene must have been. Those poor innocents there just looking for a moment of peace and prayer, and along comes a monster like that and commits that atrocity. It would appear that one of his companions died in an accident they had when they hit a tree while trying to escape. The guy's head smashed against the steering wheel, and from what I was told, his other accomplice also managed to escape. But later, the police found him under a bridge, muttering about the shadow people who had killed his buddies. The man revealed the location of where the accident had occurred and revealed the names of his henchmen, but upon arrival the cops found only the body of the one behind the wheel and had been searching for Spellman, who went into the woods trying to flee. Spellman's other henchman, the one who ratted him out, committed suicide a couple of hours after being taken to the brig by hanging himself with his own jeans. And the police suspected that my attacker was using the whole shadow thing to try to get out of the maximum penalty by using the card that he was sick in the head. But if you ask me, I think what happened that night is that those tormented souls were out for revenge. After that episode, I have changed my routine. I've started working during the day as an Uber driver and decided to stay home at night for a while. I don't know when I'll feel safe again going out after dark without fear of the shadows. The experience left a mark on me that I honestly doubt will go away anytime soon. October 15th, 2008 is a date that is etched in my memory. The night was deep and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was driving along a road that honestly I'd already traveled 1,000 times, since during my years as a truck driver this road was part of my routine. But that night, something felt strange, as if the air was charged with tension. I started my journey at 8 p.m. on that day that ended up being a real chaos. My mission was to deliver a gigantic load of cleaning products to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As I drove, I couldn't stop thinking about Cindy, my 8-year-old, who had stayed home with her nanny. Since her mother had left, everything had been a struggle. I had arranged to stay with her most of the day, so I talked to my boss and asked him to put me on night shifts. It was a sacrifice because driving at night always has its risks, but it was the right thing to do to be there when my little angel woke up for school. At first, everything went well. I turned on the radio to listen to my usual station, but instead, they had a talk about a series of attacks that were happening on the roads, and suddenly, a shiver ran down my spine. I listened to the reports, trying to retain every detail, and called a few colleagues to ask if they had experienced anything similar, but none of the other truckers said they knew anything about these assaults. Still, my sense of alertness was heightened, so I decided to turn up the volume on the radio, but in the blink of an eye I lost the signal. All I heard was a horrible static noise that filled the cab of the truck. The radio had been acting up lately, and although I had repaired it at the time, I hadn't had time to really get into it. As I tried to restart the radio, something at the edge of my vision caught my attention, so I slowed down, at first thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. But upon closer inspection, I realized I wasn't wrong. Directly ahead, there were a couple of fallen tree trunks obstructing the road. Under normal conditions, this would not seem strange if the road was surrounded by trees. But here there were no other trees in sight, so it was clear to me that this blockage was no accident. Someone had done it on purpose. Little by little, the tension began to take hold of me. I didn't know who had put those logs in the road or what was going to happen next. At that point, I thought about turning around and looking for another route. But after 5 hours behind the wheel, I knew that would take even longer and I was already on deadline, so taking a deep breath, I decided to go ahead and see what happened. I knew that the warehouse I had to take the load to was just around the corner, but despite that, I hesitated for a moment. Something inside me told me that I should move away from there and look for another road, even if it meant delaying me even more. But facing my own logic, I decided to go ahead. I slowly pressed the accelerator, with the idea of passing carefully over the fallen logs. I didn't want to go too slowly, as I feared that the merchandise could be compromised. But I quickly realized that this choice was a big mistake that could cost me dearly. Just as I was about to cross that wooden barrier, out of nowhere, a group of men emerged from the shadows as if it were a horror movie. In an instant, my heart stopped in my chest. I froze at the sight of those guys with metal pipes and stones in hand, and my mind played tricks on me, bombarded with questions about what they might do to me. Then, as if everything was happening in slow motion, I watched as they launched themselves at my truck. The guys started slamming their pipes into the front of my vehicle, and the sound of metal clashing against steel echoed in my ears loudly. It wasn't long before they started throwing bricks and stones through the windows, and the windshield glass exploded into 1,000 pieces. In a moment of terror, a brick impacted directly on my head. The pain was brutal, and soon I felt the warmth of blood sliding down my forehead and dripping into my left eye. My vision blurred almost completely, and a pang of anguish coursed through my body. Then I tried to speed up and get through the barricade, but it was useless. It was higher, and there were more logs than I had calculated. Plus, the enormous weight of my truck loaded with merchandise made it even more complicated. While all that was happening, I saw this bunch of hooded guys running around the truck, filling me with an indescribable fear. However, in the midst of that chaos, all I could think about was Cindy, my little girl. I was all I had, and the thought of not going home and leaving her alone, with no one to take care of her, made me shake off a little of the paralysis of panic that was running through me at that moment and fill me with determination. Her mother was already gone, and I couldn't leave her too. I had to get out of this any way I could. It was a strong internal struggle I had at that moment. I am a Christian man, and I didn't want to hurt anyone, but it was clear that the situation had become critical. It was my life or theirs, so I mustered what courage I had left and honked my horn loudly to give them a warning. I wasn't going to stop. I knew that was the last thing I would do. So when I saw that the attack didn't stop, without further thought, I put my foot down on the accelerator. The truck started moving and I saw those guys scatter when they saw me coming. I had to get over the logs any way I could, even if the load shattered in the process. After all, it was my life I was trying to save at that moment. Getting through the logs was a hard blow and I felt the crates in the back shaking violently, falling and breaking. But at that point, I didn't care. I had to get out of there as soon as possible. I finally made it through the barrier of trees and thought the danger was behind me. But just when I thought I had escaped, I heard a loud crash coming from outside. My heart stopped again. I didn't know if it was more guys coming after me or something worse, so I looked in the rearview mirror, and that's when adrenaline turned fear into pure survival necessity. I had to keep going. Suddenly, I looked out the window and came face to face with a guy who looked like a total nutcase, literally clinging to the door of my truck as if he were a psychotic passenger. His eyes were bloodshot, and in his left hand he was holding a sharp rock. Fortunately, my door window wasn't shattered like the windshield, but it had so many cracks, it looked like museum glass in disrepair. The window was closed, but still the guy's screams echoed in my cabin terrifyingly. The guy was screaming that he was going to send me straight to hell, and for a moment fear gripped every corner of my being, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. So I put the pedal to the metal, ignoring his madness and threats completely. Then the madman lifted the rock and smashed it hard against my window. I wasn't surprised when the glass burst into 1,000 pieces. It was already so damaged from the previous blow that it looked like it couldn't take another one. But then he started attacking me with the rock, while I juggled to keep control of the truck and dodge his blows. I couldn't let him hit me in the head again and decided I had had enough. With one hand on the steering wheel and the other trying to deflect his attacks, I managed to make him drop the rock. But at that moment, the guy started pushing his hand towards the steering wheel, trying to stop me. I felt I was losing a lot of blood from my head wound and I couldn't take that fight all night. So my mind was racing, looking for a way out. At first I thought about swerving violently, but that might cause me to hurt someone else on the road. In desperation, I started thinking about the route I had taken earlier and remembered that up ahead there was a police station. So I mustered all the strength I had left and tried to concentrate on getting there. But as they were accelerating the truck at full throttle, I noticed that the guy started to realize that something wasn't right. And just before he reached the station, he finally jumped out of the truck. I looked in horror through the broken rearview mirror and watched as the guy fell to the asphalt. Luckily, the cars behind managed to brake in time, avoiding what could have been a complete disaster. At first, I thought the man might be dead, but surprisingly, I saw him get up and limp away, disappearing from my sight. The police had already heard the commotion and a few officers started running after the guy, while those who stayed behind came over to help me. When I finally got out of the truck, I started to explain to them what had just happened and told them how I had been brutally attacked by a group of crazies. I also told them that everything was recorded on my dash cam, but just as I was trying to pull out the device, a tidal wave of vertigo hit me and suddenly everything around me started to blur. Suddenly, I found myself on my knees on the ground, surrounded by policemen who seemed to be very worried. I could barely discern at that moment because everything in my head was scrambled. One of the officers approached me and said in a firm voice, "Take it easy, buddy, you're hurt bad, you're badly hurt. Is there someone we should call?" But before I could answer, everything around me began to go dark. The last thing I managed to think about before I passed out was Cindy. She was the only thing that mattered. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, and to my relief, I saw my little daughter sleeping in a chair next to me. Her little face was tear-stained, which broke my heart, and just as I was about to call her, she woke up, and seeing me, ran straight over to hug me. It was a moment of pure joy. I couldn't believe that I had survived that nightmare and had the chance to see my daughter again. We cried together in happiness, relieved that it was all behind us. Shortly after, the policeman came in and asked me to tell them what had happened, so I asserted myself and told them all the madness I had lived through. Then one of them told me that they had checked my dashboard camera and saw the images of the incident, and assured me that they were conducting an intensive search to catch those who were still at large, and that they would do everything possible to bring them to justice. After that terrible episode, I decided that I would never drive at night again. I talked to my boss and asked him to give me shorter hours, even if it meant a lower salary. What I really wanted was more time with Cindy. Besides, I knew it was a way to keep me away from those dangers that lurked in the darkness of the streets. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. This incident left me with a couple of mental after effects, a bit of post-traumatic stress disorder. I still feel restless avoiding that place where it all happened. Although I always try to find longer routes for my travels, I have to admit that I do so because paranoia haunts me. I feel like some of those guys are still lurking around, waiting for the perfect moment to get revenge or hurt me again. So I keep avoiding the night, trying to take care of Cindy and giving her as much time as I can, convinced it's the best way to keep us safe. It was a quiet, dark night when Regina left her friend Cassie's house a little later than she had planned. She had gone to a party and for a change had overdone it with the drinks. Her feet stumbled as she walked along the empty sidewalks, streetlights flickering overhead. There wasn't a soul in sight, and although her home was a good 40 minutes away, she didn't feel safe at the moment. She stopped under a red light, hoping to find some peace and an Uber to take her back home, as her eyes felt heavy and her vision was blurry. So she sighed and decided she'd better call a cab and, after a couple of taps on her phone screen, booked one. The cab number was 2008. As she waited, she glanced around. The silence of the night and the wind blowing made her feel a little uneasy. I should have listened to Cassie, she thought in frustration. This is a bad idea. A sea of disturbing thoughts were running through her head when suddenly, she saw a pair of headlights approaching the end of the street, and she felt lucky to see that it was a white Uber coming straight towards her. Without a second thought, she raised her hand to stop it, and, as if it had been the most normal thing in the world, the car stopped right in front of her. But Regina was so out of it that the intense headlights of the vehicle blurred her vision even more. When she saw the number 200 on the door, she knew it was her cab, and without a second thought, she got in. The driver was a guy with a strange smile. He looked at her in the rearview mirror and asked, "Where are you going?" She, still confused, replied, 21 Lamar Street, just drive fast." Then the man smiled again, started the engine and said, "Suit yourself." As the guy started up, Regina closed her eyes and tried to clear them for a few minutes, but when she opened them again, she noticed that they were not on the main road. The car had started down an old dusty road that was in no way the road to her house. A shiver ran up her spine and she couldn't help but ask, "Hey, what road is this?" The driver turned to her with an even wider grin and replied, "I took a shortcut, miss, don't worry." Beginning to feel uneasy, Regina checked the GPS on her phone and saw that there was indeed an alternate route, but she still felt uneasy. Then the driver started asking her questions. "So, you live alone, huh?" he said as he looked sideways. She felt strange right away but tried to be polite. "Yes," she replied, trying to cut the conversation short, but despite her effort, the guy kept making comments that made her skin crawl. Then he blurted out something that sent an icy shiver down her spine. "You know, a pretty girl like you shouldn't be out on the streets alone at night. Haven't you heard about the recent incidents?" Suddenly, her friend's words came to her mind. That night, while they were on the couch at the party, Cassie had shared a chilling story about a serial killer on the loose. Everyone was shocked, including her and the rest of the group. Remembering that chilling conversation, she got goosebumps and began to question what was going on. Sitting there, with the car pulling out of the driveway and the driver smiling ominously, Regina realized that perhaps she had made a big mistake getting into that cab. The empty streets, the dark night, and a stranger behind the wheel did not seem to be the ideal combination. Being aware of that, her heart began to beat faster, and an intense coldness ran through her body as she tried to keep calm. What had she done? In the back of her mind, she remembered Cassie still talking about what she had heard on the news, and going over every word that came out of her mouth made Regina's stomach twist more. "Listen, in Savannah they've already discovered 3 bodies on the roads. Apparently these people had their throats slit. It's like a horror movie. They were found lying in the brush on the main road," Cassie related, her voice full of that mixture of morbid and worried. As she had mentioned, the police had no idea who was responsible, but there were rumors that a serial killer was on the loose, luring his victims into death traps before disposing of them. The bodies turned up on deserted roads where no one was around when the attack occurred, Cassie had said, and with each word she remembered, Regina grew more and more tense. It was as if a horror movie was playing in her head, as she sat in the back seat watching that disturbing stranger through the rearview mirror. Suddenly, her phone vibrated with a notification from Uber, and as she opened the app, Her heart sank to her stomach. It showed her that she had been charged for a canceled booking. What is this? She stared at it suspiciously. Car number 2008 had been waiting at the pickup location for quite a while, but she hadn't shown up, so the driver had canceled the trip and left. That meant something absolutely chilling, that the guy behind the wheel now was not the same guy she had booked. Regina felt her stomach clench into a fist. She couldn't even speak. The idea of screaming for help seemed absurd, as there wasn't a soul around, so calling someone was useless, especially with that guy right there. Then she realized that this man who was now leading her to who knows where probably didn't have good intentions. Could he be the killer they were talking about at the party? Sweat began to bead on her forehead, and panic began to consume her. She took a deep breath to try to regain some calm, and thought that the only thing she could do to get out of this situation was to use her head, but she needed to think calmly to do so. As she struggled in her thoughts, the man glanced at her in the rearview mirror and asked, "Are you okay, miss?" She forced a smile that was hard for her to maintain, but tried to sound calm. "Yes, I'm fine. How much longer until we get there?" The driver's voice sounded cold and distant as he replied, "Not much longer." The way the man responded sent another shiver through her body, now feeling in her gut that something very bad was coming. She prayed mentally, praying to God to protect her from this stranger with dark intentions. Then, trying to remain calm, she asked him, "What were we talking about before?" "About the throat killer, right?" he said in a tone that didn't sound good at all. He laughed as if the conversation was an amusing pun. Regina immediately noticed how strange he sounded and decided to follow the thread. Yes, that the police will catch him soon, won't they? They'll have found the bodies of his victims by now." The guy let out a derisive laugh and said, "Miss, the police found his victims because he wanted them to." His response sounded like he was sure of what he was talking about, and with a chilling air of implied satisfaction. Regina's heart raced 1,000 beats a minute. She couldn't stop thinking about what that meant. This man was not only apparently aware of what was going on, but he seemed to enjoy talking about it. The sense of danger intensified, and paranoia began to take hold of her with each passing second. She was now almost convinced that this man was the killer, and she knew she had to come up with a plan. Something that would get her out of this situation before it was too late. People are crazy. They really are. Sometimes you can't even identify them, like they're wearing masks to throw you off, he said. The more the driver talked about the serial killer, the faster Regina's heart went. But suddenly the car started shaking as if he was having a seizure, and the guy slammed on the brakes. The car came to a screeching halt, making a deafening noise, and he shot out to look at the engine. Regina stayed inside, sensing that everything was getting complicated, and after a while the man came to her window and said, "There seems to be a little problem. Wait here while I take a look at it." At that moment, a little alarm went off in her head. She knew this couldn't end well, and that move to stop the car had probably been part of his macabre plan, so she needed to act fast. Carefully, she stepped out of the car, clutching her purse as if it were a shield. She stealthily made her way to the back of the car, noticing the vast fields and dark forest on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the guy was telling her, "Looks like we need an alternative, miss. All indications are that this car won't start today. If you don't mind, my house is nearby. We can go there and call a mechanic." That sentence set off all the alarms in her head. This guy clearly wanted to take her to an isolated place, so she didn't respond. She just stood still behind the car, trying not to make any noise. She knew it was her only chance to run away. Then she began to hear footsteps getting closer and closer. Her heart was pounding, and when the driver came behind the car, she made a risky but necessary decision. She slid to the opposite side, moving with agility, and when the guy realized that she had disappeared, the surprise in her voice was noticeable. "Miss! Miss!" At that moment, Regina decided not to be intimidated, appeared behind him and answered him firmly. "Yes, what is it?" Her eyes were wide as saucers, fixed on him, ready for whatever might come. The adrenaline gave her a dose of courage, and maybe also the alcohol she still had in her system. The thing was that she wasn't going to let fear rule her. It was now or never. Regina took out the canister of pepper spray she always kept in her purse and in one swift movement, sprayed it in the man's face. He began to scream and writhe from the burning, while cursing and threatening to slit her throat and leave her body on the road. This was no longer the kind and polite man he seemed to be a while ago. Now he was showing his true nature, and for Regina, it was increasingly clear who she was dealing with. But instead of taking advantage of this gap to go into the forest and flee, she decided to do something different. While her body struggled between fear and bravery, in a quick movement, Regina took the wrench that the man had left on the hood of the car when closing it, and, after spraying it again with gas, she hit him repeatedly in the head until he collapsed to the ground, passed out or dead. Who knows? Then she climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and as if by magic, the car started. Leaving the man behind, Regina returned to the main road and drove to the nearest police station. There she reported the incident, and quickly a patrol car drove to the place she indicated, finding the man still there. Unfortunately, the guy was dead. The blows Regina delivered with the wrench shattered his skull. Now she was completely horrified, knowing that she had killed a man. However, after several investigations a few days later, it was proven that it was indeed the serial killer. And upon searching the car, the cops found ropes, bleach, duct tape, and what is more horrifying, the huge hunting knife he used to kill his victims, and that to this day she wonders why he did not use it against her. But the cops say that maybe he did not have time. Maybe he did not see her as a threat and wanted to save that surprise for later. But he never imagined that that night the one surprise would be him. I have been on the road for more than 20 years, and honestly, I have never experienced anything as scary as that time. As a truck driver, from time to time you have to spend the night in places that are not recommended, where you would rather not fall asleep. But unfortunately, it's part of the job. This story is close to my heart, not because I like it, but because of what it reminds me of. After what happened, I now plan every route down to the smallest detail. I've become cautious. Some would say it's a blessing in disguise. I see it as a trauma. 3 years ago, I was driving along my usual route, going through a long tunnel surrounded only by trees and darkness. Suddenly, I realized that I had already spent more than 8 hours behind the wheel without a break, and soon it would be 9. I had to make a stop and rest. I wasn't going to risk losing my trucker's license by falling asleep on the road and causing a mess, so I decided to stop for a while. But that is something I deeply regret. I was minutes away from 9 hours on the road when I saw a rest area up ahead. I was relieved to see that it opened up to a small path into the woods on the side of the road, and I immediately recognized it. It's a small clearing where many of us truckers usually stop, so once there I got out of the truck and started getting ready for the night, brushing my teeth and stuff. That's when I heard an engine approaching. The creek where I was brushing was right next to my truck, and I saw some bright lights approaching, but when the car passed me, I was filled with suspicion. The car slowed down and I watched the darkened windows as the vehicle slowly drove by. At that moment, I had a bad feeling. Not that there was any real threat, I mean, it could have been just any car driving down that road to the small town a few miles down the road, but something inside me clicked. Somehow I felt in my bones that something wasn't right. I spit out the toothpaste and quickly made my way back to my truck, closing the door just as the car disappeared behind the trees. Once inside, I did what any cautious trucker would do. I closed the screens, set the locks, and secured the door handles with the seatbelt. It's a classic trick to be more protected in untrustworthy places. The night passed, and with the curtains closed, I got into bed, covered up, and in seconds fell into a deep sleep. But what felt like moments later, I awoke with a start. Although I was disoriented by the interruption, I managed to make out soft footsteps walking toward the front of the truck and stopped just outside the door. I was in shock for a moment, not knowing if what I felt was fear or pure anticipation. The pounding on the door grew louder and more frantic, and as I tried to put on my boots, my hands were shaking with nerves. I couldn't get the laces tied, so I yelled, "Who's there?" But I received no response. "You better get out of here before I call the police," I announced. But those knocks only got worse. It was obvious someone was trying to break in, so without a second thought, I jumped into the driver's seat, snapped the keys into the ignition, and the engine began to roar. I peered through the curtains and saw bright lights looming ahead. "You're going to crash into my car, buddy," said a male voice from the window of the car in front. "Get out of my way," I yelled as I opened the door. At that instant, I saw a guy dressed completely in black get out of the car and run out towards me. In one hand, he was holding a hammer, and in the other, a gun. My heart dropped as I saw this guy flash a disturbing smile and then run straight for my truck. Suddenly, he stopped just in front, and his expression turned serious. As he stared at me, he approached at a slow pace. At that moment, I opened the window and yelled at him, "If you try anything funny, I'll run you over." But suddenly, the guy started running like crazy, yelling and waving the gun and hammer in my direction, but not firing. I panicked, and the engine shut off. The window was still slightly open as I tried to restart the now unresponsive engine. Suddenly, I saw how that madman pressed his face against the glass, leaving sharp teeth in sight. They were like those of a piranha, and that left me in shock. At that moment, he hit the glass hard. It shook, and I kept trying to start the engine. A second blow resounded, and the glass began to splinter. Suddenly, the engine finally started, the noise rumbled, and it began to give off a strong smell of fuel. That's when the third bang caused the glass to explode, and that's when I saw those unhinged eyes staring at me and then the barrel of the gun being jammed into the hole in the glass. At that moment, I panicked, and out of pure reflex, I stepped on the gas pedal full throttle, which sent the man flying out of the truck. Just as I heard 3 gunshots, I sped out of the rest area and back onto the road. Through the rear-view mirror, I saw him stand in the middle of the road, looking at me once again. And again he pointed the gun at me, but I didn't hear the shot. Surely he realized it was useless. Since that day, I always consider my routes more carefully. If that weirdo guy comes back, he won't meet someone unsuspecting. I've decided I have to be prepared. Now, there's a loaded rifle hidden under my bed because if that creature comes back, I promise that the nightmare he left me with will have a different twist. This time, the scales will tip in my favor.